Hi everyone, welcome to English Anytime. Today we will talk about I can understand but cannot speak. Don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Throughout my life, I have encountered an interesting and perplexing phenomenon. Although I have developed a strong ability to understand English, both in its written form and in spoken contexts, I continue to struggle significantly when it comes to speaking English using the everyday vocabulary that is common in casual conversation. This disconnect between comprehension and speech has been evident to me for many years, and I have come to realize that it is the result of various factors, including the way in which I was educated, the specific circumstances under which I learned the language, and the limited opportunities one had to practice spontaneous conversation. In the early years of my education, particularly on January 5th, 2000, when I first began attending an English class at 8 a.m., the emphasis was placed on reading, writing, and listening comprehension, while the development of conversational skills was not given the same level of importance. Over time, this focus on the receptive aspects of the language allowed me to excel in understanding written texts and even in following lectures and audio recordings. Yet I found that my ability to speak in a natural and fluent manner lagged behind. The situation became more pronounced during my secondary school years between 2005 and 2009, a period during which I frequently scored well in English comprehension tests and examinations, but consistently struggled with speaking assignments that required the use of everyday expressions and idioms. For instance, on March 15th, 2005, I participated in an exam that tested my listening skills, and I performed remarkably well. However, when tasked with an oral exam on April 20th, 2005, I hesitated, my responses were slow, and I found it difficult to retrieve the appropriate vocabulary needed for casual conversation. This early experience set the stage for a recurring pattern that I would encounter throughout my academic and professional life. By the time I reached high school, around July 20th, 2010, I had come to understand that my strengths in English lay predominantly in my ability to decode and interpret written information rather than in my capacity to produce language spontaneously. Despite this realization, I continued to receive positive feedback on my academic performance, which further reinforced my reliance on comprehension skills rather than on active language production. This early foundation in reading and listening, while undoubtedly valuable, inadvertently contributed to a sense of inadequacy when I was required to engage in face-to-face conversations in English, especially in situations that demanded the use of colloquial language. As I progressed into higher education and eventually into the professional world, the consequences of this imbalance became increasingly apparent. On January 10th, 2012, I attempted to join a conversation club in an effort to improve my speaking skills, only to find that my long-standing habit of relying on academic and formal language structures made it difficult for me to adapt to the informal and dynamic nature of everyday dialogue. The challenges I faced during this period were not solely related to vocabulary, but also to the spontaneous nature of conversation, where one must think quickly and respond without the benefit of premeditation. This introductory period of my life laid the groundwork for a deeper exploration of the reasons behind my difficulty in using everyday conversational English, a subject that I continue to examine with both curiosity and determination as I strive to achieve a more balanced command of the language. Following the early experiences described above, I found that my journey with the English language continued to evolve in ways that further accentuated the gap between understanding and speaking. One of the primary factors that contributed to this phenomenon was the structure of the educational system in which I was immersed. From my early schooling in the late 1990s and early 2000s, The curriculum was heavily weighted towards reading and writing. Teachers placed great emphasis on grammar, vocabulary memorization, and the analysis of texts, often neglecting the practical aspects of spoken communication. For instance, on October 12, 2003, during a classroom exercise, I was asked to write an essay on a historical event. I poured my energy into constructing a well-organized piece that demonstrated my command of complex sentence structures and advanced vocabulary. However, when the teacher later asked me to verbally summarize my essay in front of the class, I hesitated and found it challenging to express the same ideas with the ease I had achieved in writing. This incident, among many others, highlighted a fundamental issue. The language skills required for reading and writing are not automatically transferable to speaking, especially in the context of casual, everyday conversation. Another significant factor that played a role in this discrepancy was the nature of the learning environment outside the classroom. I grew up in a community where English was not the primary language spoken on a daily basis. At home and in social settings, I primarily communicated in my native language. This limited exposure to English in natural conversational settings meant that while I could learn the language through textbooks and formal instruction, I lacked the immersive experience that is essential for developing fluency in spoken communication. On June 15th, 2015, I had the opportunity to travel to an English-speaking country, hoping that the immersion experience would help me overcome my conversational challenges. While I was able to understand the native speakers and even enjoyed watching local television and reading newspapers, I found myself unable to engage in spontaneous conversations with the locals. The reason for this was clear. The real-life exchange of ideas required a quick recall of words and phrases that I had never practiced outside the confines of academic exercises. In addition to these environmental factors, psychological elements also contributed to my difficulties. I often experienced a fear of making mistakes when speaking English. This fear was not only a result of the high standards set by my academic background, but also stemmed from a deep-seated concern about being judged by others. I vividly remember an incident on December 25th, 2019, during a festive gathering with native speakers, where I attempted to share a story in English. My words came out haltingly, and I stumbled over simple expressions, which led to a moment of embarrassment. This experience reinforced my anxiety and made me even more reluctant to speak in similar settings in the future. Research in language acquisition suggests that anxiety can severely impede the ability to retrieve and use vocabulary effectively in real time. It is one thing to understand a language when given time to process the information, and quite another to produce language on the fly under the pressure of social interaction. This psychological barrier, combined with a lack of practice in everyday speaking, created a cycle that was difficult to break. Another aspect that has contributed to my difficulty in speaking is the discrepancy between academic English and everyday conversational English. The textbooks and educational materials I used were filled with formal language, structured sentences, and a vocabulary that was more aligned with written communication than with spoken dialogue. Everyday conversation, on the other hand, is replete with idiomatic expressions, contractions, and informal phrases that are rarely covered in academic settings. On May 5th, 2021, I spent an entire day in conversation with a group of native speakers during a community event. Although I could follow their discussions with ease, I found that I was often at a loss for the right words to express my thoughts, as the language they used was far more relaxed and spontaneous than the language I had been taught. This encounter underscored the need for a different approach to learning spoken English. one that emphasized real-life usage rather than the rigid structures of formal instruction. Over the years, I have also explored various methods in an attempt to bridge this gap. On September 10th, 2018, I enrolled in a public speaking course designed specifically for non-native speakers. The course was intended to build confidence and improve pronunciation through a series of exercises and presentations. While I did notice some improvement in my ability to articulate words and maintain a steady pace when speaking, the progress was slow, and the course did not fully address the issue of everyday vocabulary usage. The exercises were scripted, and although they helped me overcome some of my anxiety, they did not simulate the unpredictability of spontaneous conversation. Recognizing this limitation, I began to experiment with more dynamic methods of practice. I started using language learning apps that focus on conversation simulation, and I even recorded myself speaking on various topics, then reviewed the recordings to identify areas for improvement. On February 1st, 2020, I began a daily routine of speaking exercises that involved describing my day in simple English, trying to incorporate common phrases and idioms that I had learned from listening to native speakers. Despite these efforts, I continued to encounter difficulties. One of the most persistent challenges was the speed at which spoken language unfolds. In conversation, native speakers tend to speak quickly, often using contractions and colloquial expressions that are not found in written texts. This rapid pace leaves little room for me to formulate responses, and the pressure to respond immediately only exacerbates my anxiety. I recall an afternoon on July 18th, 2020, when I attended a casual meetup for language learners. The conversation flowed rapidly, and I struggled to keep up. I found myself silently nodding in agreement while internally racing to recall suitable phrases, only to realize that my mind had gone blank at crucial moments. This experience was both frustrating and disheartening, and it further solidified my understanding that the ability to comprehend English does not automatically translate into the ability to speak it fluently. The cumulative effect of these factors, educational emphasis on passive skills, limited exposure to natural conversational settings, psychological barriers, and the inherent differences between formal and informal language, has led to the current state of my language proficiency. Despite achieving a high level of understanding in English, I continue to face significant challenges when attempting to engage in everyday conversation. The gap between comprehension and speaking is not unique to me. Many language learners report similar experiences, where they can understand native speakers and even read complex texts, yet find themselves unable to participate in spontaneous dialogue. This phenomenon is often referred to as the receptive, productive gap in language learning theory. Various studies have shown that while receptive skills are generally easier to develop through passive learning, productive skills require active practice and exposure. This principle has been evident in my own experiences. For instance, while I have spent countless hours reading books, watching English language films, and listening to podcasts, I have not invested an equivalent amount of time in practicing spontaneous speech. The difference is not merely a matter of time spent. It is also a matter of the type of practice involved. Receptive activities allow for reflection, repetition, and analysis, all of which contribute to a deeper understanding of the language. In contrast, productive activities demand immediate recall and real-time construction of sentences, skills that are honed through repeated, active use of the language in social contexts. It is important to note that this disparity is not a reflection of a lack of intelligence or effort on my part. Rather, it is indicative of the way language learning is structured in many educational systems. The methods that emphasize reading and listening, while effective in building a foundation, often fall short in developing the spontaneous, agile thinking required for fluent speech. Additionally, the fear of making mistakes in front of others creates a significant psychological barrier that discourages active participation. This fear is compounded by the high value placed on correctness in academic settings, where errors can lead to negative evaluations and a diminished sense of self-confidence. The result is a vicious cycle in which the desire to speak correctly inhibits the willingness to speak at all, thereby limiting the opportunities for practice and improvement. As I reflect on these experiences, I realize that overcoming this gap will require a multifaceted approach. It is not enough to continue practicing in the same manner that has proven effective for developing comprehension. I must seek out opportunities for genuine, unscripted conversation. This might involve participating in language exchange programs, joining informal discussion groups, or even engaging in self-directed practice by recording spontaneous monologues on a variety of topics. Moreover, addressing the psychological aspect of language learning is crucial. Developing a mindset that embraces mistakes as part of the learning process, rather than as failures, is essential for building the confidence needed to speak freely. I have begun to adopt this mindset gradually, reminding myself that errors are inevitable and that each mistake is an opportunity for growth. Over the years, I have learned that the journey to language fluency is not a linear progression, but rather a series of ups and downs, marked by both moments of success and periods of frustration. The milestones in my language learning journey, from the early days of formal instruction on January 5th, 2000, to the challenging encounters during conversation meetups in 2020, serve as constant reminders of the progress I have made and the challenges that remain. It is clear that while I have built a strong foundation in understanding English, the path to achieving fluency in everyday spoken communication requires deliberate, targeted effort and a willingness to step outside my comfort zone. I remain committed to this process, recognizing that every conversation, no matter how imperfect, is a step forward in bridging the gap between my receptive and productive language skills. Furthermore, it is essential to examine the role of memory and cognitive processing in this discrepancy. The human brain processes language in a variety of ways, and the pathways used for understanding are not always the same as those used for speaking. When I listen to someone speak or read a piece of text, my brain has the luxury of time to decode and interpret the information. This process is largely passive and allows for the engagement of multiple cognitive resources, such as contextual inference and pattern recognition. In contrast, speaking requires the rapid retrieval of words and grammatical structures, a process that demands both speed and accuracy. This difference in cognitive demand is one of the reasons why I find it easier to comprehend English than to produce it spontaneously. Studies in psycholinguistics have shown that the retrieval of lexical items, the words we use in speech, is a complex process that can be significantly impaired by anxiety and lack of practice. This is evident in my own experiences, where I often find that my mind goes blank at crucial moments during conversation. Even when I am aware of the correct word or phrase, the pressure of real-time communication can prevent it from surfacing. This phenomenon, sometimes referred to as a tip-of-the-tongue state, is not uncommon among language learners. However, for me, it occurs with frustrating regularity, especially when I am faced with the need to use everyday vocabulary that I have not practiced in a natural context. To further illustrate this point, I recall an afternoon on August 14th, 2023, when I was engaged in a discussion with colleagues during a break at work. The conversation shifted rapidly from one topic to another, and I struggled to keep up. Although I understood every nuance of the conversation, I found that when it came time for me to contribute, I was unable to quickly access the colloquial terms and expressions that would have allowed me to participate meaningfully. This incident was a stark reminder of the cognitive challenges inherent in speaking a second language, where the speed of processing and retrieval plays a critical role. Additionally, the educational emphasis on reading and writing has meant that I have developed a deep, analytical understanding of English, which, while beneficial for academic purposes, has inadvertently created a barrier to fluent speech. The formal language that I learned in school is structured and predictable, with rules that govern grammar and syntax. In contrast, everyday spoken English is often informal, filled with shortcuts, idioms, and even regional variations that do not always conform to standard grammatical rules. This disparity means that when I attempt to speak, I sometimes find myself defaulting to the formal language structures that I am most comfortable with, which can sound out of place in casual conversation. For example, instead of saying, "I'm going to grab a bite," I might say, "I'm going to obtain some food," a construction that, while grammatically correct, feels awkward and unnatural in a relaxed setting. Over time, such experiences have made it clear that a different approach is needed, one that focuses on the nuances of everyday speech rather than on the rigid structures of formal language. In light of these challenges, I have begun to explore various strategies to enhance my speaking skills. One such strategy has been to immerse myself in environments where everyday English is spoken naturally. This has involved watching television shows, listening to podcasts, and even attending local events where English is the primary language of communication. On multiple occasions, I have tried to mimic the speech patterns and idiomatic expressions that I have observed in these contexts. This practice has yielded some improvements, but it has also highlighted the gap between passive exposure and active use. While I can easily recognize and understand the casual language used in these media, integrating it into my own speech has proven to be a much slower process. Another strategy has been to engage in deliberate focused practice. I have set aside time each day to speak aloud, even if only to myself, in order to practice forming sentences and using common phrases. I have also sought feedback from native speakers and language tutors who have pointed out areas where my speech sounds overly formal or hesitant. Although this feedback has been invaluable, it has also underscored the reality that breaking long-standing habits requires time and persistent effort. One of the most important lessons I have learned through this ongoing process is the value of embracing imperfection. It is all too easy to become paralyzed by the fear of making mistakes, but I have come to understand that errors are an inevitable part of language learning. Each misstep in conversation is not a failure, but rather an opportunity to learn and improve. This mindset shift, though gradual, has been essential in helping me to take risks and attempt to use everyday vocabulary without the constant fear of judgment. Delving deeper into the challenges of mastering spoken English, it is instructive to consider the influence of social dynamics and cultural expectations. In many educational contexts, particularly in my own experience, there has been a strong emphasis on correctness and precision in language use. This emphasis, while beneficial for written communication, has often led to a culture of fear around speaking, where the risk of making a mistake looms large. I remember vividly an incident on November 30th, 2022, when I attended a debate club meeting. The atmosphere was competitive, and the expectation to articulate thoughts eloquently was palpable. Despite having a solid understanding of the subject matter, I found myself overthinking every word, constantly worrying about pronunciation and grammatical accuracy. This overcautious approach not only slowed down my speech, but also robbed me of the natural rhythm and spontaneity that characterize everyday conversation. The experience underscored the detrimental impact of an overly critical environment on language production. Furthermore, the cultural context in which one learns a language can significantly influence speaking ability. In cultures where public speaking is highly valued and errors are openly corrected, learners may develop a heightened sense of self-consciousness. This is particularly true for individuals who, like myself, have spent much of their formative years in environments where the focus was on written assessments and formal instruction. In such settings, the act of speaking becomes fraught with the fear of embarrassment or criticism. This psychological burden creates a barrier to effective communication, as the speaker is more concerned with avoiding mistakes than with conveying meaning. In addition to these social and cultural factors, the rapid pace of modern communication poses its own challenges. In today's fast-paced world, conversations often occur at a speed that can be intimidating for language learners. The use of slang, abbreviations, and rapidly shifting topics means that there is little time for thoughtful responses. This dynamic environment requires not only linguistic proficiency, but also a high degree of mental agility. I recall an experience on March 2nd, 2021, when I attended a networking event. The discussions were lively and fast-moving, and I struggled to interject my thoughts in a timely manner. Even though I fully comprehended the conversations, the pressure to respond immediately left me feeling overwhelmed and out of place. This incident was a stark reminder that fluency in spoken language is not solely about vocabulary or grammar, but also about the ability to process and produce language in real time. Additionally, the evolution of language itself has contributed to the gap between comprehension and speaking skills. English, like all living languages, is constantly evolving, with new words and expressions emerging regularly. The language taught in academic settings often lags behind the language used in everyday conversation. As a result, many language learners find themselves well-versed in the formal version of English while remaining unfamiliar with the colloquial expressions that are prevalent in daily interactions. This discrepancy is not merely a matter of vocabulary, but also of style and register. The formal language that I learned through textbooks and exams is inherently different from the relaxed, informal language used in casual settings. For instance, while I may confidently discuss complex theoretical concepts in a formal context, I often stumble when trying to engage in small talk about everyday topics such as weather, food, or sports. Recognizing this, I have made concerted efforts to familiarize myself with the vernacular and informal expressions that characterize everyday English. I have spent hours watching popular television shows, listening to podcasts featuring native speakers, and even engaging in online forums where informal language is the norm. These activities have helped me to some extent, but the transition from passive understanding to active use remains a significant hurdle. Looking forward, I recognize that the future holds both challenges and opportunities for further improvement in my spoken English. As technology continues to evolve, new tools and platforms are emerging that can facilitate more interactive and immersive language learning experiences. For example, virtual reality environments and advanced language exchange applications are beginning to simulate real-life conversations with remarkable accuracy, providing learners with a safe space to practice spontaneous speech. On November 15th, 2023, I participated in an online VR language exchange session, which allowed me to engage with native speakers in a simulated social setting. Although I encountered moments of hesitation and occasional lapses in vocabulary recall, the experience was both exhilarating and instructive, offering a glimpse into the potential for technology to bridge the gap between comprehension and active communication. Moreover, I have observed that the landscape of language education is gradually shifting to place a greater emphasis on communicative competence. Progressive educational institutions are now recognizing the importance of integrating speaking practice into the curriculum, ensuring that learners are not only able to understand the language, but also to use it effectively in everyday situations. This shift, though still in its early stages in many parts of the world, offers hope for individuals like myself who have long struggled with the challenges of speaking. In my own journey, I have begun to set specific, measurable goals for improving my spoken English. These goals include engaging in at least one conversation per day with a native speaker, dedicating time to interactive language learning apps, and participating in community events where English is the medium of communication. I believe that by setting clear targets and tracking my progress, I can gradually overcome the obstacles that have hindered my speaking ability for so long. Additionally, I am exploring the possibility of joining a formal language program that emphasizes immersion and practical usage. Such programs, which often include study abroad components and intensive conversational practice, have been shown to yield significant improvements in spoken fluency over relatively short periods. Although the prospect of enrolling in an immersive program is both exciting and daunting, I am committed to pursuing every available opportunity to enhance my communication skills. It is also important to acknowledge that the journey to fluency is deeply personal and varies greatly from one individual to another. While my experiences have been shaped by a particular set of educational and cultural circumstances, the challenges I face are shared by many language learners around the world. The recognition of this common struggle has led to a wealth of research and collaborative efforts aimed at developing more effective language teaching methodologies. These efforts underscore the importance of a holistic approach to language learning, one that values the integration of receptive and productive skills, and that recognizes the unique challenges posed by speaking a language in real time. In reflecting on my own progress, I am encouraged by the small but significant improvements I have made over the years. Each new conversation, no matter how imperfect, is a step towards greater fluency. The milestones that I have encountered, from the early lessons in a formal classroom setting to the more recent experiences in immersive language exchange sessions, serve as reminders of both the progress I have achieved and the work that still lies ahead. I am hopeful that, with continued effort and the support of innovative educational tools, I will eventually overcome the barriers that have long impeded my ability to speak English fluently in everyday contexts. This optimism is not based on wishful thinking, but on the concrete improvements that I have observed over time, however incremental they may be. Ultimately, the journey to language fluency is a testament to the power of perseverance, adaptability, and the human capacity for growth. The challenges I face in speaking English are significant, but they are not insurmountable. With each passing day, as I embrace new methods of practice and continue to engage with the language in diverse contexts, I am confident that I will gradually bridge the gap between comprehension and fluent speech. In summary, the persistent gap between my ability to understand English and my struggle to speak it fluently in everyday situations can be traced back to a confluence of factors that have influenced my language learning journey over the past 2 decades. From the early days of formal education on January 5th, 2000, where the focus was overwhelmingly on reading, writing, and listening, to the later experiences in conversation clubs, public speaking courses, and immersive language exchanges, every stage of my development has contributed to a strong receptive skill set paired with a relatively underdeveloped capacity for spontaneous speech. The rigorous academic environment emphasized the importance of precision and correctness, inadvertently instilling in me a fear of making mistakes that has hindered my willingness to engage in everyday conversations. Moreover, the limited exposure to informal, colloquial language in my community and the rapid, dynamic nature of modern communication have further complicated the process of acquiring natural spoken English. Despite these challenges, my ongoing efforts, ranging from daily speaking exercises and shadowing techniques to participation in role-playing workshops and virtual reality language exchanges, demonstrate a steadfast commitment to bridging this gap. Each milestone, such as the Conversation Club on January 10th, 2012, the public speaking course on September 10th, 2018, and the immersive VR session on November 15th, 2023, has provided both valuable insights and incremental improvements, reinforcing the belief that with sustained practice and a willingness to embrace imperfection, fluent everyday communication is an attainable goal. This journey, while marked by setbacks and moments of self-doubt, is also a testament to the resilience and adaptability inherent in the process of language learning. It highlights the importance of integrating both receptive and productive skills, and of continuously seeking opportunities to apply knowledge in real-world contexts. As I move forward, I remain optimistic that the deliberate and multifaceted strategies I have adopted will eventually lead to a more balanced proficiency in English, one where the ability to understand and the ability to speak harmoniously converge. Reflecting on my experiences, I recognize that the challenges of spoken language are not insurmountable obstacles, but rather stepping stones towards achieving comprehensive fluency. By continually adapting my learning methods, embracing new technologies, and fostering a mindset that values growth over perfection, I am confident that I will overcome the limitations of my current speaking abilities. Ultimately, the journey of mastering spoken English is a dynamic, ongoing process that not only enhances my communication skills, but also enriches my personal and professional life. With each passing day, as I integrate new experiences and refine my approach, I am steadily progressing towards the goal of expressing myself freely and confidently in everyday conversations.